instead. Now, some teenagers will leave it at that. But if you're like me, you'll decide to push the envelope a little bit further. And when you do this, which I would not suggest trying at home, but my mother would say that she doesn't need to explain herself, that I'm living in her house, and these are her rules, and that I can go to my room. So this is a classic example of traditional authority, and we see that across society today in many different institutions, like work, school, religion, and family. And as a society, we've structured it so that there is, it's kind of like a triangle, and there's an esteemed authority at the top, and we've invested an assumed amount of power and responsibility, respect, and esteem that we allow that position. And as a society, we've decided that we do need some sort of authority, that's required for mere functionality and for division of responsibility. But that's not what I'm questioning today, rather the nature of that authority. So I'll begin with a famous psych experiment known as the Milgram experiment. And this happened just after World War II, after the Nazi trials. And upon being asked what their motives were for committing these terrible, terrible crimes, the Nazis said that they were simply doing what they were being told to do. They were listening to the people above them and following orders. And as we know today, what they were doing was completely terrible. But Stanley Milgram wanted to see if this phenomena would be true among normal people as well. If they would go through with a terrible, terrible act just by the blessing of an authority. So to do this, he set up an experiment. And it's kind of complicated, but I'll just try to explain it briefly. So there's a teacher who's a volunteer, and there's a student. And they're separated by the wall. Now the teacher thinks that the student is hooked up to a cord of electricity. And what the student is supposed to be doing is answering questions. Now for every question that the student gets wrong, they get shocked by electricity. But for every additional question that the student gets wrong, the voltage gets higher, even to a point where it could be deadly. So, the teacher's in the experiment, and the student keeps getting questions wrong. So naturally, he has to raise the voltage. But it gets to a point where the student, who isn't actually hooked up to the cord of electricity, but is in on the whole experiment, he'll at some point say, "This hurts too much. I don't want to go through with the experiment anymore. Please stop." And so the teacher at that point will look around him, and he'll see the scientists in the white lab coats, and he'll ask, "Well, wow, this guy's really in a lot of pain. Should I really keep going through with this?" And the scientist will say, "It's okay, everything will be all right, just keep going on with the experiment." And so what Milgram found was that 65% of people went through with the experiment to the highest capacity of shock, the highest voltage of shock, knowing that they would be harming the person across the wall. And so this prompted Milgram to publish a book called Obedience to Authority, where he begged the question why these people continued on with it. And that's the same question that I'm begging today. And a lot of this has to do with legitimacy. Now, I've separated legitimacy into two separate but equal kind of factors. The first is held in a title. Now, as I talked about with traditional authority, we've kind of designated certain titles in our society a certain amount of esteem and responsibility and respect, whether that be doctors, teachers, parents, whomever. And legitimacy, by the way, is, I'm sorry, I forgot to say this, quantifying how effective the leader is in manifesting their ideas. The second is based upon consequence. Now this is pretty simple to understand. So my mom goes out for an hour and she's running some errands, and she says, "Melissa, I want you to clean the dishes before I come back." I have two choices. I can either do the dishes or I cannot do the dishes. Now, it's not that I want to do the dishes, but I know at my house I'm going to do them. Why? Because I know what the consequence will be if I don't do them, either getting yelled at or getting grounded. So this is a lot of what authority uses in order to get things done. But it's important to note that truth and morality are irrelevant in legitimacy, as we noted in the Milgram experiment. Another critical aspect of authority is power. A lot of human history has been the struggle for power, and we see that in our daily lives as well. We feel it most immediately with wanting more self-ownership, whether that be over our own decisions, wanting more options, wanting more flexibility or ability to think for ourselves. versus just trying to appease an authority figure. So this kind of sets up a problem, these two things. And I separated that into three different aspects. The first part of the problem is that everyone wants a degree of power. How big or small that is, it ranges. The second is that working from appeasement of authority is not, that people work from wanting to appease authority and not from self-ambition. They work from wanting to not get in trouble versus working from a place that's self-motivated. And the third, as I talked about in traditional authority, is bloated power in a leadership. Now, this doesn't always happen, but it definitely can in our current structure. So I'm posing a solution, and that is to relinquish hierarchical authority. Now, you may be sitting there and thinking, well, I don't think I can relate to this at all. I go to Conestoga, and my teachers, they let me have a lot of individual freedom of thought and do what I want to do with my education. And that's exactly the kind of system that I'm going to be suggesting. Our teachers work as empowerers, not as delegators, which gives the students the ability to then thrive and work on their own. So the first way to do this is, like I said, increase autonomy. And what that does is that it boosts motivation and engagement of the people below the authority. Now, as for the leadership, they have the responsibility of empowering versus delegating, as I said before, because throughout society, these positions have sort of assumed a role that is supposed to be a manager and a delegator, but we don't need to operate that way. And the third is that higher positions for functional authority, the leadership, should incentivize for results and not dictate. And this is true across platforms, whether that be incentivizing with grades, with money, or just holding accountability. So the results, the first is that you're working from within and not based upon consequence. And what that allows is innovation, free thought, room for error, and room for learning, which I'm sure we can most definitely feel here at Conestoga. The second is the support of the nature of the authority, because you're all sharing the ideology of how you function, and then you can work more cohesively. And the third is a team mentality, because all are dependent on one another, and there's a lot more equality among the system. And that's it. Thank you.